The smoke was still rising from my cedar fence when the first police cruiser pulled onto Larkspur Lane. One look at the burn marks, and I knew this wasn't an accident. The fire pattern was too clean, too deliberate. Across the street, my neighbor, Denise Calloway, stood in her driveway with her arms crossed, watching 6-foot flames climb my fence like it was entertainment. The landscaping crew had already disappeared. 2 fire engines arrived within minutes. My golden retriever Scout barked non-stop from inside the house. Meanwhile, I was calmly taking photos, 40 of them, because I already knew what I was looking at. Denise thought she had burned a fence. She had actually created a criminal case. She had no idea. The owner of that fence was the county's senior arson investigator. If you've ever dealt with an HOA that thought it was above the law, you're going to enjoy this story. Because Denise expected a neighborhood argument. Instead, she ended up facing a felony investigation. My name is Roger Adele. For 19 years, I worked for the county fire marshal's office. The last 11 were spent investigating arson. When a fire didn't match the story, I was the person they called. Before that, I served as a firefighter until a knee injury forced me into investigations. It turned out to be the best move of my career. I earned a degree in fire science, specialized in fire and explosion investigations, and testified in court dozens of times. Judges trusted my analysis of burn patterns more than the excuses of the people who started the fires. 18 months ago, I officially retired, but the county still brings me back for major cases involving arson, insurance fraud, or suspicious fires. The house on Larkspur Lane was my late wife Carol's dream. After she passed away, I stayed because every corner of that home reminded me of her. Most neighbors knew exactly what I used to do. Denise didn't. To her, I was just a quiet widower who mowed his lawn every Saturday morning. She thought I was an easy target. She couldn't have been more wrong. Denise Calloway became president of the Brook Hollow Estates HOA 2 years earlier. From that day on, the neighborhood changed. She drove a white Range Rover with the vanity plate HOA 1. A clipboard was always in one hand. A camera was always in the other. She photographed everything. Trash cans left out too long. Mailboxes painted the wrong shade. Even garden decorations she didn't approve of. Her favorite line never changed. It's not personal. It's policy. The problem was, it always became personal. Before she targeted me, she'd already made life miserable for half the neighborhood. The Ostrowski family paid hundreds in fines over a basketball hoop that had been there for years. Pearl Simmons, an elderly widow, was forced to remove a small memorial cross from her flower bed. A young couple received legal threats while their newborn was in intensive care. Retired Army Colonel Frank Ibarra was fined over the height of his American flagpole. Even after he cited federal law, Denise refused to back down. Single mother Yvonne Price was accused of running an illegal home business simply because she sold handmade candles online. She proved the accusation was false. Denise never apologized. No one fought back. People paid the fines, complained in private, and hoped someone else would challenge her. That someone turned out to be me, and it all started with my fence. On Tuesday morning in early April, I found a bright yellow HOA violation notice zip-tied to my mailbox. According to Denise, my 6-foot cedar privacy fence violated community rules. She claimed the maximum allowed height was 5 feet 6 inches. The fence had been standing for 11 years. I built it myself while my wife Carol held the level beside me. That same afternoon, I called the HOA office. Denise answered. Before I could finish explaining that I still had the original permit, she interrupted me. Mr. Adele, the fence has to come down. It's not personal. It's policy. I calmly explained that the fence had existed long before she became HOA president. She dismissed it immediately. Then she laughed and said, "Don't worry. I'll send you everything in writing." At the time, I thought it was just another HOA dispute. I had no idea. It was the first step toward the fire that would soon bring police cars and fire trucks to my driveway. 2 days later, more notices arrived. Not 1, 3. Each cited a different HOA rule. Each came with fines starting at $75 and doubling every 30 days. I answered every notice the same way I handled investigations for 30 years. Everything in writing, certified mail, copies of every document, and one simple request. Show me the board vote that authorized these violations. The following week, Denise came to my house herself, clipboard in one hand, camera in the other. She photographed my fence from every angle before walking up my driveway. Then she delivered her latest threat. The HOA, she claimed, had unanimously voted to place a lien on my home if the fence wasn't removed within 30 days. I stayed calm. I told her I'd have my attorney review the decision. According to the HOA bylaws, a lien required a properly noticed board vote. That hadn't happened. For the first time, I saw her confidence crack. She didn't expect anyone to know the rules better than she did. That weekend, my neighbor Tom Whitfield quietly stopped me by the mailbox. He looked around before speaking, almost like he was afraid someone might overhear. Tom told me Denise had done the same thing to another family 2 years earlier. After they challenged her fines, someone mysteriously backed a landscaping trailer into their mailbox. Officially, it was an accident. Tom didn't believe that. Neither did I. That conversation changed everything. I stopped treating this like an HOA dispute and started treating it like an investigation. I installed a weatherproof security camera facing the fence, photographed every notice, recorded every phone call, documented every interaction. Then I spoke with more neighbors. A pattern quickly appeared. Over 2 years, homeowners who challenged Denise often suffered unexpected property damage soon afterward. Nothing serious enough to trigger a police investigation. Nothing anyone could prove, just enough incidents to convince an experienced investigator that they weren't random anymore. The next week, things went far beyond a fence dispute. I returned from consulting on a warehouse fire for the county and found someone had been in my backyard. My motion-activated camera had captured part of the person, a lavender jacket, the same color Denise often wore. The person was crouched beside my gas meter taking photographs. I couldn't prove why, but I had a strong suspicion they were looking for another excuse to accuse me of violating HOA rules, so I saved the footage. A few days later, I attended the monthly HOA meeting. The agenda included one item: fence compliance, Adele property. During the meeting, Denise looked directly at me and said, "Some homeowners think the rules don't apply to them because of who they used to be." She never mentioned my name. She didn't have to. Everyone in the room knew exactly who she meant. After the meeting, Linda Choi quietly stopped me in the parking lot. She looked around before speaking. Then she said, "Most of us don't agree with what she's doing. We're just afraid of being next." That sentence stayed with me because I'd heard it before, not in neighborhoods, but during criminal investigations. People stay silent when they're afraid they'll become the next target. A week later, something happened that made this personal. When I got home, the brass address plaque my late wife Carol had chosen for our front porch was gone. Someone had unscrewed it from the wall and left it against my garage door. Attached was a note: non-conforming signage, contact HOA office. There had been no warning, no violation notice, no board approval. Someone had walked onto my property, removed something that meant a great deal to me, treated it like garbage. I called the HOA office immediately. Denise answered. When I asked if she had removed the plaque, she hesitated, then replied, "If it was unauthorized signage, someone from the compliance team handled it." The problem was, there was no compliance team. There was only Denise, and a group of volunteers too intimidated to challenge her. The last incident happened on a Thursday evening, and this time, Denise crossed a line. Behind my garage was a small storage shed. Inside it was the wheelchair ramp I had built for my wife Carol during the final months of her illness. I rarely opened that shed, but that evening the door was wide open. The lock had been cut with bolt cutters. The ramp had been dragged into the yard and leaned against my fence. A bright yellow HOA sticker was slapped across it. Unauthorized structure, subject to removal. I stood there in silence. This wasn't about HOA rules anymore. She had taken something built for my dying wife and turned it into another violation notice. At that moment, I made a decision. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to lose my temper. I was going to do what I'd done for 30 years. Watch, document, collect evidence, and wait for the truth to catch up with her. I just needed one mistake. 4 days later, she made it. The HOA had organized its annual debris burn day. Residents were allowed to burn yard waste under a county permit. The permit had one name on it: Denise Calloway. She had personally signed as the responsible party. That detail would become very important. That Saturday, Denise's landscaping crew piled branches behind my property. The problem was, they stacked everything directly against my cedar fence. Any experienced investigator knew that was dangerous. I walked over and calmly asked the crew foreman to move the pile farther away. He simply shrugged. Denise told us to put it here. I called the HOA office. No answer. I called Denise's cell phone. Still no answer. About 20 minutes later, I smelled smoke. I rushed to the back door. Flames were already racing up my fence. And the moment I saw the burn pattern, I knew this wasn't just an accident. The moment I saw the flames, I knew something wasn't right. 30 years of investigating fires teaches you to read burn patterns like a mechanic reads an engine. That day, the wind was blowing away from my property. If the burn had been done correctly, the fire should have moved away from my fence. Instead, it moved straight toward it. The debris pile had been placed less than 2 feet from the fence. The county permit required a minimum clearance of 10 feet. Someone had ignored the rules. Once firefighters knocked the flames down, I moved in for a closer look. That's when I saw it. 2 distinct accelerant pour patterns on the lower fence boards. Not random burn marks, not flying embers. Intentional fuel patterns. Someone had helped the fire climb the fence. Before anyone touched the scene, I documented everything. 41 photographs, every angle, every burn mark, every detail. A few minutes later, the county's arson investigator arrived. Priya Shah. I'd trained her years earlier. She looked at the fence, then looked at me. "Roger, tell me you already know what we're about to find." I nodded. "I do." Together, we examined the scene. The debris pile had burned much hotter than ordinary yard waste should. There was also a scorched trail running along the ground before turning back toward the fence. That isn't how a normal debris fire spreads. It's the kind of pattern investigators look for when a fire has been intentionally directed. The fence told the same story. The deepest charring wasn't where the flames naturally reached. It started low, exactly where the accelerant had been poured. I never mentioned Denise's name. That's not how investigations work. Evidence comes first. Suspects come later. By the time the fire crews packed up their hoses, we had already opened a formal arson investigation. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with Scout resting beside me. I made one decision. I wasn't going to fight Denise as an angry homeowner. I was going to investigate her the same way I'd investigated every suspicious fire in my career, by the book. First, I officially removed myself as lead investigator. The fire involved my own property. That meant a conflict of interest. I disclosed it immediately and asked the fire marshal's office to assign Priya Shah as lead investigator. I would remain only as a witness. The request was approved the next day. From that point on, the evidence spoke for itself. We collected samples from the burned fence for laboratory testing. We reviewed the burn permit Denise had signed. It clearly required the debris pile to be at least 10 feet away from any structure. Instead, it had been stacked directly against my fence. Next, Priya interviewed the landscaping foreman without Denise present. His name was Danny Coker. First he was nervous. Then he realized he was speaking to official investigators. Finally, he told the truth. Danny admitted Denise had personally instructed him where to place the debris pile. More importantly, she had sent the instructions by text message. One sentence changed the entire investigation. Stage the pile along the back fence. It needs to look like it got out of hand. That single message was devastating. Priya obtained Danny's phone records through a subpoena. The conversation contained even more. For weeks, Denise had been giving detailed instructions about what she called the Adele situation. One message was impossible to explain away. Get it close enough to the fence that it catches. Nobody's going to measure 10 feet with a tape. At that moment, this stopped being an HOA dispute. It became a criminal case. We connected every piece of evidence. The broken shed lock, the wheelchair ramp, the false HOA violations, the burn permit, the text messages, and the pattern of similar incidents involving other homeowners. Together, it showed months of escalating harassment that ended in arson. We didn't need dramatic speeches. We didn't need guesses. We only needed evidence. Because in court, a clean chain of evidence is far more powerful than any argument. The investigation officially took 11 days. For Denise, everything seemed normal. She had no idea the case against her was growing stronger every day. In fact, she sent me another HOA violation notice. This one demanded I repair my fire damage fence at my own expense. The same fence her own landscaping crew had set on fire. Even Priya couldn't believe the nerve. For a short time, we hit one obstacle. The first laboratory test on the fence came back inconclusive. Firefighting water had contaminated the sample. Without forensic proof, the defense could argue it was all speculation, so we waited for the second test. A day later, the results arrived. They confirmed the presence of a petroleum-based accelerant. The burn pattern proved it hadn't spread naturally from yard debris. Someone had deliberately fueled the fire. Combined with Denise's text messages, the violated burn permit, and Danny's testimony, the case became nearly impossible to dispute. Then Denise made another move. She hired an attorney. Within days, her lawyer argued that the entire investigation should be dismissed. Because I was both the property owner and a former county fire investigator. It sounded convincing for a moment. Even I wondered if it would delay the case. It didn't. Because from the very beginning, I had officially removed myself from the investigation, pre-handled every decision. Every piece of evidence, every interview, every report, everything had been carefully documented. The county attorney reviewed the records done and denied the motion. Instead of weakening the case, the challenge strengthened it. It showed the court that the investigation had followed every rule from the very first day. And with that, Denise's best defense disappeared before the trial had even begun. The case reached its turning point on a Tuesday morning. 2 county officers arrived at Denise Calloway's house. Within minutes, the entire neighborhood knew something was happening. I wasn't there. I stayed out of the arrest, just as I had stayed out of the investigation. But my phone didn't stop ringing. Neighbors called. Others sent messages. Tom Whitfield came to my house that afternoon. He told me Denise answered the door wearing her usual lavender tracksuit. Only this time, there was no clipboard in her hand. The officers informed her she was under investigation for arson and permit fraud connected to the fire at my property. According to Tom, confidence disappeared from her face instantly. She tried to say, "It's not personal. It's..." Then she stopped. She couldn't even finish the sentence she'd repeated for 2 years, because everyone finally understood the truth. It had never been about policy. It had always been personal. The evidence led to multiple criminal charges: felony reckless burning, permit fraud, and criminal mischief connected to the break-in at my storage shed. Security footage and phone records tied everything together. Investigators also reopened complaints from other homeowners. What once looked like isolated incidents now appeared to be part of a much larger pattern. Rather than face a trial, Denise accepted a plea agreement. She paid restitution for the damage to my fence, covered part of the investigation costs, was permanently barred from serving in HOA leadership, and completed 120 hours of mandatory fire safety and permit compliance training. Considering how this all began, that final requirement was almost poetic. Within 2 months, Brook Hollow Estates had a new HOA board. The changes came quickly. The association settled with the Ostrowski family and several other homeowners who had been unfairly targeted. A new rule was introduced. Every future burn permit had to be reviewed by the county fire marshal before approval. Pearl Simmons placed the small memorial cross back into her flower bed. This time, no one complained. Frank Ibarra's flagpole fine was cancelled. The HOA refunded every dollar with interest. Yvonne Price continued selling her handmade candles without interference. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt different. People stopped whispering. Neighbors talked openly in their driveways again. The fear was gone. One afternoon, Tom Whitfield smiled and said, "It finally feels like this neighborhood belongs to the people who live here." A few months later, I saw Denise one last time. It was outside the county courthouse. She wasn't carrying a clipboard. She wasn't giving orders. She just looked like an ordinary woman. She noticed me and walked over. After a long silence, she said, "I never actually looked up what you did for a living." I smiled. "No, I don't suppose you did." That was the end of the conversation. There was nothing left to argue about. The evidence had already spoken. My fence was rebuilt using the restitution she was ordered to pay. Ironically, I rebuilt it to exactly 5 feet 6 inches. Not because Denise was right, but because the height had never been the real issue. Scout still barks at the mail carrier every morning. Tom still stops by on Sunday afternoons, and we sit on the porch Carol always dreamed of. These days, we don't talk about Denise anymore. Some stories don't need a final argument. Once the truth comes out, it speaks for itself. Looking back, this story was never really about a fence or an HOA. It was about what happens when someone mistakes authority for power. People like Denise keep pushing boundaries because no one ever stops them, until one day, they push too far. For 2 years, she intimidated neighbors, issued baseless violations, and treated people like they had no choice but to obey. She assumed this time would be no different. She was wrong. Not because I was tougher, but because I knew how to document the truth. Evidence doesn't get angry. It doesn't exaggerate. It simply tells the story exactly as it happened. My late wife, Carol, used to tell me, "The truth doesn't need defending. It just needs to be written down." She was right. More than anything, I'm grateful the people in our neighborhood no longer have to live in fear. Pearl got her memorial back. Frank got his flagpole back. Families stopped worrying about the next violation letter. And Brook Hollow finally became a neighborhood again. If this story proves anything, it's that real accountability isn't about revenge. It's about making sure the facts speak louder than the excuses. Now I'd like to hear from you. What would you have done if you were standing in my backyard watching that fence burn? Would you have confronted Denise, called a lawyer, or trusted the evidence to do the talking? Share your answer in the comments. And if you've ever had an HOA horror story of your own, I'd love to read it. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe for more true-style neighborhood justice stories. Until next time, stay calm, document everything, and remember, the truth always leaves a trail.